Alrighty, so we just covered the discussion on tariffs and showed how tariffs, this tax, basically benefits domestic producers, the domestic manufacturers, because they produce more units and get to sell them at a higher price, right? But also the government benefits as well from a tariff revenue. And this, of course, is all paid for by the consumers. So the consumer is the big loser in all this. Also, in the tariff scenario, the foreigners are losers as well, because of course they're still getting the world price, so they get no price advantage out of the tariff scheme. It's the same price they had on free trade is the same price they're getting under this tariff, but they're selling fewer units, right? So you're still getting the same price, but you're selling less. Your obviously your total revenue, your total sales is obviously going to fall. So they are not better off as well. So I guess I should have mentioned as well, the foreigners are also not as well off. And of course, what normally would what could happen is, of course, the foreigners might not like this and retaliate and get sort of trade wars, right? Because we just if we were to actually do this, what it suggests is Canada gains at the loss of Japan, kind of thing, a zero-sum game. Now, the import quota or voluntary export restrictions, if the foreign country voluntarily agrees to go along with this, as opposed to the country sort of forcing, Canada, right, by edict, saying this is the quantity restriction, is the next scenario. And to keep things simple, what we do is we say, let us assume that the government says you foreigners are only allowed to import Q2, Q3. Okay, so it's going to be the same quantity of imports as the tariff scenario. Okay, now obviously by restricting the amount of imports, right, it's like we're creating scarcity. The government is almost like intentionally creating scarcity. It's saying, you normally would ship in 10,000 cars, you can only ship 3,000, kind of thing. So it creates scarcity. This, of course, jacks up the prices. I mean, this should also be common sense. You have scarcity, like oil and gas prices go up at the pump, kind of thing. Same idea. And of course, what that does by imposing this quota is it raises the domestic price up to PD. So from PW up to PD. Okay? But you see now, what's going to happen is really nothing to the consumer. The consumer is still paying through the nose, right? They're still going to demand Q2 because they now see the domestic price of PD. And domestic suppliers will still produce the Q3 number of units. And of course, so that's how many they'll produce. And they'll sell them all at the domestic price. Okay, so they're going to be earning this higher. So from a domestic producer perspective, they're still getting the higher price and selling more units. So this is like a win-win. You're selling more, and each one you sell, you get a higher price for it. So you're definitely better off, no question about it, if you're a domestic producer. The only change between the tariff scenario and these quotas is that the foreigners, the foreign exporters who are importing their cars in this example into Canada, is that they too get this domestic price as well. So that means that for the quantity imported, the gap between Q2 and Q3 that gets imported, instead of getting the world price, the foreigners get the domestic price. So that box labeled number 4 now no longer goes to the government in form of tariff revenues, but goes as profit actually to the foreigners. So this is actually beneficial. So I suppose one might take, if you're somewhat cynical, you might say, well, that calling these quotas as a sort of like a voluntary export restrictions is maybe the word voluntary is being used kind of loosely, because think about what happens is that, I mean, under the tariff scenario, that box number 4, that revenue would have gone to the government as a tariff revenue. It would have been like more money in the kitty, so to speak. Now, under this quota scenario, the government's not getting that. They get nothing. They don't get it. Instead, it all goes to these foreigners. So it's almost like, how voluntary is voluntary? It almost sounds like we're bribing them. We're saying, here, you can almost like have our tariff revenue. It seems to be what's happening, right? Because it's all of that would have gone to the government is now going to these foreigners. So from this scenario, if you were a foreigner, I mean, you probably would be the happiest with the free trade scenario, because you get to import a ton of stuff. But if you had to sort of pick between the tariff and the quota, it almost seems like you want to pick the quota, because under the tariff or the quota, it's still the same amount that you get to import, the Q2, Q3. But under the tariff, you only get the world price. But under the quota, you get the higher domestic price. So there's this scenario seems to suggest that it's not really so much about the foreigners being voluntary, cooperating. It almost seems like it's in their own best interest. It's most profitable for them to actually engage in this, right? So it's not really so much a benevolent foreigners saying, we love you, Canada, we want to be nice to you. It's like, we like that money. More money for us is a good thing, so we'll voluntarily agree to it. Is basically what this chart is showing. So that concludes my discussion on these tariffs, quotas, and the free trade scenario under certain simplifying assumptions. The main one being that there's one fixed world price, and that Canada, of course, can't influence the world price. And of course, the quota is this restriction is the same size as what would happen under an equivalent tariff. Okay, but generally speaking, this sort of captures the essence of what these restrictions do. I mean, the main point from this is that the consumers end up with less stuff. And ultimately, we want, ideally, for people to consume more, to buy more stuff. The reason why that, and that might sound very materialistic, and well, it is very materialistic, but it's that the thing is that if the whole society has more stuff, then it basically, this means is the standard of living of the average person is going up, right? If only, let's say, 1 person out of 100 has a car versus like everyone's got a car, then we would normally think that this situation where everyone has a car has a higher standard of living, because we have more conveniences in life, more things to benefit from. So the consumer's worse off because of these tariffs and quotas, because they end up buying or consuming less, and they pay more for it, a higher price. And also, from our game theory discussion as well, this might be followed by retaliation. So in other words, in the short run, this might lead to more Canadian jobs, right? Because we've shifted production to Canada. But if other countries retaliate and do the same thing to us, then we could lose jobs as well. So it might wash out. So this might not be the job creator that it looks like, And so overall, this suggests that the free trade scenario is probably the best one.